Greetings, comrades! We are finishing the 5th level of our Russian Conspiracy Iceberg. Today we have a lot of political conspiracy theories. Was there really a nationalist-minded Russian party hiding within the Soviet government? Who is Alexander Dugin, often called the ideological mastermind of modern Kremlin politics, and how were his views influenced by an underground club from 1960s Moscow? Finally, we will talk about something that seems almost impossible. The story of how Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko almost became the president of Russia. So, without further ado, let's jump into it. Russian party in the USSR. It is well known that during the Soviet era, there could not be any political parties other than the CPSU in the USSR. Nevertheless, some historians identify a shadowy group known as the Russian Party. It is notably described in historian Nikolai Mitrokhin's monograph The Russian Party, the movement of Russian nationalists in the USSR, 1953-1985. It was an informal nationalist movement whose ideology included Russian ethnic nationalism, xenophobia and anti-Semitism. Rumors suggested the Russian Party drew members from various levels of society, including party officials, artists, writers and dissident nationalists. Following the Slavophiles of the 19th century and Dostoevsky, they defended the idea of the special path of Russia and Russian people on the basis of national traditions, state, cultural and religious. They attributed most of the Russian people's woes, including their oppression in the USSR, to alleged Jewish dominance in Soviet leadership. By the early 1980s, their ideology offered a vague alternative to the stagnant Soviet system. Therefore, the activities of the Russian party were seen as traitorous and anti-Soviet. Their existence as a formal entity was never confirmed. However, even KGB head Yuri Andropov reportedly identified them as a major threat in secret memos. By the time Gorbachev came to power, the Russian party was driven underground, from which it managed to emerge only after the collapse of the USSR. So their real influence on Soviet policies, especially on some policies towards the Jews, remains unknown. Dugin's fourth political theory. Alexander Dugin is a Russian philosopher who has become quite popular outside of Russia in recent years. He is often portrayed as a grey cardinal of the Kremlin, its main ideologist, with claims that all Russian foreign policy is based on Dugin's books. I don't know how much influence he actually holds inside the Kremlin, but from the outside it seems that nowadays he spends his days shitposting on Twitter and appearing on various, sometimes far from popular platforms. Fourth political theory is a concept introduced by Dugin in his book of the same name. The main idea was to propose a new ideological model for a world that in the 20th century witnessed the emergence of three major ideologies – fascism, communism and liberalism – that have now outlived themselves. The subject of fascism was the state, communism was the class and liberalism was the individual. These three distinct political theories had one thing in common – belonging to the modern era, an era defined by progress and novelty. However, Dugin asserts that humanity has entered a new postmodern era, which means that a new political theory is needed, and a new subject. Dugin proposes the German concept of Dasein as this subject, roughly meaning being there, or human existence understood within a specific cultural and historical context. That is, the subject of Dugin's fourth political theory is something metaphysical, fundamentally alien to Western liberal pragmatism and rationality, some special path for Russia. However, it should be noted that despite the existence of the concept of the fourth political theory, there are no clear specifics about its essence. Apparently, we are waiting for it in Alexander Gelievich's future works. Penza Hermits. The Penza Hermits were a group of people led by Peter Kuznetsov, who called himself Schema Monk Maxim. In October 2007, 35 people from this group, including 4 children, entered voluntary seclusion, moving into a dugout shelter they had constructed near the village of Nikolskoye. Inside, they prepared to await the end of the world, which Kuznetsov predicted would occur in 2012 when a comet named Armageddon would strike the Earth. Kuznetsov was also convinced that tax IDs, passports, barcodes and other official documents contained the seal of the devil and had to be rejected. They gained notoriety when they refused to go to the surface, threatening to detonate the gas cylinders they brought underground if authorities attempted a forced evacuation. Ironically, 43-year-old Kuznetsov never went underground himself, instead preaching to his followers from the surface. He explained that someone had to communicate with God and clear the snow from the vent. When his 2012 prophecy inevitably failed, he tried to commit suicide and later was placed in the Penza Regional Psychiatric Hospital. Rumor has it that he is still there. Most of his followers eventually surfaced, though 2 died underground and were buried there. The survivors reportedly moved to Belarus, still clinging to their beliefs, insisting that the end has come, we just don't see it yet. Spherulites of the Champ Island. Champ is an island located in the central part of the Franz Joseph Land archipelago in the Arctic Ocean. It is known for its strange, perfectly round stones, the origin of which is still debated. Some seem to be partly buried in the ground, while others stand exposed to the winds. Some stones have lost their original shape, probably due to winds and low temperatures. Some spheres have been split open and their cross-sections clearly show a substance of organic origin at the center. Some people see these orbs as echoes of a lost civilization, some as a trace of aliens, and some simply as a miracle of nature. There is even a hypothesis that the mysterious spherulites are fossilized dinosaur eggs. Scientists, of course, have explanations. The deposition of carbonites around some shell fragment followed by erosion or constant friction underwater, but looking at the 3-meter spheres you begin to doubt. After all, similar formations exist elsewhere, for example in Costa Rica, and nobody knows for sure what they really are. Protocols of the Elders of Zion. This part concerns a document published in Russia in 1903, presented as a report on secret meetings of Zionists in Basel. It allegedly outlines the plans by Jews to establish world domination and destroy the Christian world. The essence of the 24 Protocols is a conspiracy to create a world monarchy centered in Europe, headed by a king-despot of Zion's blood. The main enemies of the coming Jewish monarchy were announced to be Russian autocracy and papacy. An abridged version first surfaced in December 1901 in Mikhail Menshikov's article Plots Against Humanity in Novaya Vremya newspaper, reaching full form by 1903. In 1920, the first foreign-language edition of the Protocols was published in Germany. Shortly thereafter, the Protocols were published in Poland, France, England, and the United States. These editions often blamed the October Revolution of 1917 on Jewish conspirators and warned of Bolshevism spreading west. The most accepted version today, well, excluding the claim that it's all pure truth, is that the Protocols are a plagiarism of a little-known mid-19th century pamphlet attacking Napoleon III, written by the French satirist Maurice Joly. Despite being debunked as a forgery, the Protocols remain influential in far-right circles even today, and are classified as extremist material in Russia. Pyramid over the Kremlin. On December 9, 2009, a dark, presumably metallic tetrahedron about 100 meters per side reportedly hovered 500 meters above the Moscow Kremlin, spinning for several hours. Over the next few months, similar sightings popped up in Berlin, Tokyo, Los Angeles, and many other major cities, all widely covered by the media. Some even speculated it was some viral marketing campaign. The event occurred just hours apart from the appearance of the so-called Norwegian spiral anomaly, observed on the same day, which consisted of a blue beam of light with a grayish spiral emanating from one end of it. That anomaly was later linked to tests of the new Bulava missile conducted by the Russian Ministry of Defense somewhere in the White Sea. Therefore, many analysts, both Russian and foreign, suggested that the simultaneous appearance of such unique anomalies as a spiral and pyramid is proof that the events were staged or simulated by Russian authorities as a demonstration of force or new military technology. Whether this is true and what exactly the obscure pyramid in the sky was meant to demonstrate remains unknown. Zmiyiv Ionosphere Center. Just before the Soviet Union's collapse, an ionospheric research station was built near Zmiyiv, 50 kilometers from Kharkov. It was modeled after the US's still active HAARP facility in Alaska. The station complex consisted of several antenna fields and a giant parabolic antenna, 25 meters in diameter, capable of radiating power of about 25 megawatts. It was designed for all kinds of ionospheric research, including artificially influencing the Earth ionosphere. So, where's the conspiracy? In modern times, of course. Many people believe that the US HAARP facility is used as a climate weapon to inflict cataclysms on geopolitical opponents. The theory goes that the USSR was well aware of this potential, which is why it rushed to create its own counterpart. But after the collapse of the USSR, the Zmiyiv complex ended up on the territory of Ukraine. It remained in a semi-abandoned state there for a long time, until recently. Since January 2022, the International Geophysical Network has reportedly detected heightened ionospheric activity over Zmiyiv. As a result, some now speculate that the Ukrainian side might have conducted scientific experiments of the ionosphere for military purposes. And the concern of Russia was that these experiments could pose a threat to its national security by potentially damaging missile defense systems, communications or power grids. Zoya's Stand-in. Zoya's Stand-in is a folk Orthodox legend telling how in the city of Kuibyshev, now Samara, during the winter of 1955-1956, a girl named Zoya Karnaukhova allegedly became petrified after dancing with an icon of St. Nicholas the Wonder Worker. Yet she remained alive, breathing, her heart beating. It was impossible to move her. People even tried cutting the floorboards beneath her feet. Doctors attempted to give Zoya an injection, but the needles broke against her skin. Policemen who witnessed the petrified girl supposedly had their hair turned grey with horror. At night, the girl reportedly screamed terribly, calling for prayers and repentance. Finally, a certain elder named Seraphim appeared, predicting that Zoya's stand-in would last until Easter. Then, on the Feast of the Annunciation, Zoya was visited by a dignified old man who subsequently vanished mysteriously. Believers are convinced that this was Saint Nicholas the Wonder Worker himself. And indeed, after 128 days, a white bird supposedly flew to the house and Zoya began to revive. What happened next differs depending on the version. One claims Zoya died 3 days later, another that she was sent to a psychiatric hospital. Official representatives of the Russian Orthodox Church in the Samara region acknowledge this legend, claiming a miracle occurred. One Samara temple even has an icon depicting the story of Zoya stand-in. What's more surprising is that the existence of rumors about a petrified girl is confirmed by official minutes of the 13th Regional CPSU Conference held on January 19 to 21, 1956. However, most police documents concerning Zoya's stand-in were reportedly lost in a fire at the Samara Regional Internal Affairs Archive in 1999. So, what was it? A miracle? Other explanations exist. Psychiatrists suggest the girl might have suffered from schizophrenia and entered a catatonic stupor, characteristic of the late stages of this disease. A third version proposes it was a case of mass psychosis among the religious and impressionable babushkas of Samara. ROA. ROA, or the Russian Liberation Army, is the name of the majority of collaborationist Russian anti-Soviet units within the Wehrmacht, created by Nazi German leadership primarily from Soviet prisoners of war between 1942 and 1944 during World War II. Frankly, even 10 episodes dedicated just to the ROA wouldn't be enough to fully cover its complex history. In the USSR, ROA and all its members were discussed exclusively in negative terms. Traitors, Hitler's bootlickers, collaborators. In Russian emigration, the narrative about the ROA was different, sometimes bordering on admiration for what was framed as a national liberation Christian movement against communism. So, which one is closer to the truth? Let's talk about it in my exclusive Patreon video. Yesenin's death. Sergei Yesenin is one of Russia's most popular poets of the 20th century. On December 24, 1925, Yesenin arrived in Leningrad, met with a few friends, and then rented a room at the Angleterre Hotel. Over the next few days, many friends and comrades visited him there. Then, on the morning of December 28th, in the same room, Sergei Yesenin was found hanging from a noose tied to a central heating pipe. The version now generally accepted among academic researchers is that the poet suffering from depression took his own life. However, according to an unofficial but persistent theory, the suicide was staged and Yesenin was actually removed by officers of the OGPU, the Soviet secret police. So, based on the autopsy data, Yesenin's death was caused by asphyxiation, but the suicide scene presents inconsistencies. One key point is that it was an almost impossible task. Yesenin was short, 168 centimeters, while the ceiling height was nearly 4 meters. To reach the pipe, he would have needed to stand on something at least 2 meters tall. Yet, no suitable object like a tall table or chair was found near the pipe, only a suitcase and a small cabinet. At the same time, cuts were found on the body, on the right and left hand, and a white dent on the forehead, which some forensic experts suggested could have resulted from a blow. Adding to the mystery, shortly before his death, the poet reportedly asked the hotel porter not to let anyone in his room. Why? The conspiracy theory about Yesenin's murder was officially refuted in 1989 by a special Yesenin commission. After conducting several examinations, they concluded the suicide was not staged and dismissed the murder claims as a vulgar, incompetent interpretation of specific information. However, critics point out that the commission largely consisted of people connected to the Communist Party, the very apparatus conspiracy theorists accused of eliminating the poet. Could they truly have reached any other conclusion? The Matyr Monster. And one more local Loch Ness monster, this time from Lipetsk. In the mid-2010s, local press reported sightings of what some claimed was an ichthyosaur or plesiosaur in the Matyr reservoir. Allegedly, the beast eats swimming dogs and waterfowl, and once even dragged away a piglet in front of a 50-year-old local resident. I have just one question: what was the piglet doing on the shore of the reservoir? Alexander Solonik. Alexander Solonik, aka Sasha Makedonsky, is a true legend of the Russian criminal world and law enforcement agencies of the 1990s. He was born in Kurgan in 1960, according to the available information. Served in the army, then briefly in the police, but then he was accused of rape and convicted. However, he managed to escape directly from the courtroom, pushing away his escorts and jumping out of a window. He went underground in Tyumen, but was caught again, receiving an additional 4 years for the escape. In the penal colony, the former policeman and convicted rapist was reportedly beaten constantly, but he escaped again in 1990, crawling to freedom through a sewer pipe. He hid once more in Tyumen, where he committed his first known murder, shooting a local crime boss. From there he fled to Moscow and, with associates, created one of the most brutal organized crime groups of the 1990s, the Kurgansky one. Within this group he became a prolific hitman. Some reports credit him with dozens of murders, including those of several rival crime group leaders. In 1994 he was caught quite by chance by police officers at a Moscow market, after which he apparently willingly confessed to more than 20 murders. And then, that's right, he escaped again, this time from the Matroskaya Tishina pre-trial detention center, a feat no one had ever managed before. A bribed detention center employee, Sergei Menshikov, smuggled in a 25-meter climbing cord, a pistol and ammunition. The two escaped by unlocking 5 doors with keys, rappelling down from the roof and fleeing to Greece. Sergei Menshikov was killed in early November 1995 in the suburbs of Athens. His killers were never found. Then, on February 2, 1997, the strangled body of Solonik was reportedly found on a garbage dump in Varimboli, another Athens suburb. Allegedly, he was killed by members of the rival Orekhovskaya OCG. However, 3 years later, arrested criminal gang leader Vladimir Tatarenkov told Greek police that Makedonsky was still alive. Complicating matters, someone later destroyed Solonik's grave in the Athens cemetery, making it impossible to exhume any remains to verify or refute Tatarenkov's claim. Findings in Simsa Bay. In 1940-1941, an expedition on the Soviet hydrographic ship Nord traveled to the Fadey Islands and Simsa Bay on the eastern coast of the Taimyr Peninsula. They have discovered the remains of a winter camp of Russian explorers and items from the early 17th century. Chess, elegant rings and earrings, many animal skins, expensive fabrics and many coins. And, most importantly, human remains, some of which were inside the hut and some outside near the hut. 2 male Pomors and 1 indigenous woman. It is a mystery who these people were and how they got there, because the place was absolutely uninhabited, and there is no information about such campaigns in any chronicles. It was frankly almost impossible to get there by sea. Judging by the competent construction of the hut and the tools available in it, its owners were clearly not novices in survival. But the gender composition raises a question. There was no room for a native woman in an uninhabited winter house, so she somehow arrived by ship. But where would a woman come from on a ship in an Arctic Ocean in the 17th century? Hence a bold assumption. They were fugitives from Mangazeyski Ostrog who had troubles with the law, and that is why there were many valuables and a woman with them. Finally, how did they die? During Soviet times, the simple answer was that they succumbed to hunger and scurry while trying to survive the harsh winter. However, a human bone reportedly found near or in their cauldron hints at darker survival methods. Judging by the analysis of the bones, the last to die was an Aboriginal woman, so she was a potential cannibal. All in all, there are more questions than answers in this story. Yuzhinky Club. The Yuzhinky Club, aka Mamleyev's Circle, was a literary and occult underground gathering that emerged in the 1960s. It convened at writer Yuri Mamleyev's communal apartment, located in a barrack and a courtyard of Yuzhinsky Lane in Moscow. Its participants were representatives of Moscow underground elite, whose spiritual quest and ideas were in stark opposition to Soviet ideology. Initially, the group focused mainly on esoteric mysticism, but gradually their ideas shifted closer to those of the European New Right. These gatherings were sometimes dubbed the schizoid intellectual underground. The mild insanity of their participants was considered highly desirable for gaining metaphysical catharsis. The Yuzhinsky Club sought to look beyond the line, attempting to cross the boundary between life and death, between different worlds. Almost all participants adopted a stance of denying the material, the human, the mundane, urging followers to transcend ordinary human existence. There are practically no materials documenting the club besides interviews with former participants. No photos or videos exist. Some claimed that circle members practiced neo-occultism and even satanism, performing rituals in an attempt to break through the limits of human reality. Others simply called the apartment a den for alcoholics and drug addicts. Most likely it was a combination of all these things. After all, one member, Igor Dudinsky, later recalled they drank literally 24/7 there, ostensibly to dull the fear of the ubiquitous KGB, but also he claimed to open the brain to cosmic ideas and energies. Despite its obscurity, it is believed that the Yuzhinsky Club significantly influenced the ideology and views of later prominent Russian intellectuals, including Alexander Prokhanov and Alexander Dugin, whose political theory we discussed earlier, and through them perhaps influenced contemporary Russian ideology itself. Menshikov bankrupted Russia. Alexander Menshikov was a prominent Russian statesman, the closest associate and favorite of Peter the Great. After Peter the Great's death in 1725, Menshikov effectively became the ruler of Russia by placing Peter's wife Catherine I on the throne. However, he did not last long in this role. On September 8, 1727, he was disgraced, deprived of property, titles, ranks and awards, and then exiled with his family to Siberia, where he died about a year and a half later. Now, the theory goes that during his 2 years effectively ruling Russia, combined with his nearly 30 years of association with Peter, Menshikov somehow managed to literally bankrupt the Russian Empire. Supporting this theory is the fact that even during Peter's lifetime, Menshikov was repeatedly found guilty of embezzling public funds and forced to pay large fines, though Peter personally forgave him each time. Peter was apparently well aware of Menshikov's tendencies. When his mentor, Franz Lefort, died, Peter famously remarked, "I have only one hand left, and even that one is thieving," referring to Menshikov. Over a quarter of a century, Menshikov amassed a fortune estimated at 13 million rubles, while the entire state budget of the empire at the time was only about 6.5 million. Menshikov owned 90,000 serfs, 99 villages, built 6 palaces, and reportedly had 200 poods of gold and silver, much of which he allegedly stole from the treasury. The legend claims that when Menshikov himself became the de facto head of state, the budget was empty, because he had stolen everything. However, it's most likely that this story is a legend, or at least a significant exaggeration of the true scale of Menshikov's theft from the treasury. Love and Worldview. Love and Worldview was a community created on the social network of Vkontakte by Yakov Burov. It primarily published videos of rather psychedelic content made by Yakov himself. I'm not sure how best to describe them, better just show them. In his animations, the creator allegedly showed scenes from the impending end of the world. The community is now closed and invite only. Yakov is arguably quite a talented artist, just a very unique one. Tsarebozhie. Tsarebozhie, or Tsar Godliness, is a doctrine according to which the last Russian Emperor Nicholas II is seen as the redeemer for the sins of infidelity of his people. The belief holds that Nicholas offered himself to God as a sacrifice for these sins. In response to his sacrifice, a nationwide repentance is required from the Russian people, followed by the restoration of the monarchy and Russia's role as a great Orthodox state. Again, the idea originated among Russian immigrants and is now popular among nationalists and monarchies. However, mainstream Orthodox clergy strongly oppose identifying the Tsar as a redeemer, emphasizing that there is only one redeemer, Jesus Christ. They consider the Tsarebozhie doctrine blasphemous, even though Nicholas II and his family have been canonized by the church as passion bearers, similar to martyrs. Tamara Samsonova. Tamara Samsonova, also known as Babushka Ripper, Tamara the Ripper, and Baba Yaga. She gained notoriety after her arrest in 2015 on suspicion of committing 2 murders with extreme cruelty. During a search of her apartment, authorities found a witchcraft book and a diary in which Samsonova had apparently detailed in 3 languages the murders of possibly 10 victims. It remains unknown why this seemingly ordinary St. Petersburg granny suddenly began killing. What is known is that back in 2000, Tamara's husband disappeared without a trace. His fate is still unknown. It is possible that he was her first victim. This wasn't her only reported oddity. After her husband vanished, neighbors claimed she sometimes liked to sit naked with her back to the window. She rented out one of her 2 rooms and frequently complained about her tenants, disliking when they used the bathroom or kitchen. Few tenants stayed long with such a landlady, so their frequent turnover didn't raise suspicion at first. Despite the diary entries, authorities could only definitely prove Samsonova's involvement in one prior murder, that of a tenant in 2003. She reportedly killed a 32-year-old man from Norilsk who rented a room from her, then dismembered his corpse and disposed of the parts. Her favorite method was poisoning the victims before dismembering them with a hacksaw. Neighbors never reported hearing screams or unusual noises from her apartment. Some of the recovered bodies were missing internal organs, and the final victim was also missing her head. What the Babushka Ripper did with these missing parts is unknown. Samsonova committed her last known murder outside her own apartment. She had asked to stay temporarily with her neighbor, 79-year-old Valentina Ulanova. Apparently deciding she liked the apartment and wanted it for herself, Samsonova allegedly poisoned Ulanova by adding sleeping pills to an Olivier salad, fed it to her friend, and then dismembered the body. A few days later, Ulanova's headless body, missing limbs and wrapped in a shower curtain, was found near a local pond. Samsonova was soon arrested. Declared legally insane, she was sent to a specialized psychiatric hospital in Kazan, where she remains today. Tisul Princess. This legend begins in early September 1969 in the village of Rzhavchik, Kemerovo region. Deep in a coal mine at a depth of 70 meters, a miner reportedly struck a large monolithic stone object. Once the strange find was brought to the surface, it was revealed to be a 2-meter marble sarcophagus. Inside was the perfectly preserved body of a beautiful woman appearing to be in her 30s, with regular European features, gorgeous, slightly curly dark hair, and wide open blue eyes. She was about 180 centimeters tall and dressed in a light translucent dress adorned with a fine floral pattern. The body was immersed in a pinkish blue liquid which seemed responsible for its pristine preservation. Eyewitness accounts claim one worker secretly tasted this liquid. This curiosity supposedly cost him his life. Weeks later, he allegedly went insane and that winter was found frozen dead on his own doorstep. Then KGB officers arrived, confiscated the sarcophagus, loaded it onto a helicopter, and the mysterious woman, dubbed the Tisul Princess by locals, was never seen again. However, a couple of years later, a professor from Novosibirsk supposedly gave a lecture in Rzhavchik, claiming further research placed the find's age at an astounding 800 million years, older than the dinosaurs. He also stated her clothes were made of an unknown material, perhaps crystal scales, using technology unknown to modern science. Most incredibly, the professor claimed genetic analysis showed the Sleeping Beauty was genetically identical to modern humans. But then the KGB supposedly intervened again, dispersed the lecture, covered up the original dig site and classified all research. Furthermore, persistent rumors circulated in the village that the Tisul Princess had begun to kill those who disturbed her rest. People genuinely feared for their lives. Within a year, 7 men involved in the original discovery reportedly died under mysterious circumstances. The legend expands further, suggesting dozens of similar finds. Between 1969 and 1973, dates vary. Supposedly near Rjavchik alone, the military unearthed another 8 sarcophagi, containing similarly preserved ancient bodies of men and women. Reports mention other alleged finds, 2 in Mongolia, 4 in China, 1 in Montenegro and 4 in North America. Based on this supposed geography, believers speculate these beings inhabited Earth during the time of a single supercontinent. Of course, the proponents claim that the level of modern science doesn't allow us to appreciate the true value of these finds, assuming they exist at all. Lukashenko wanted to rule Russia. There is an interesting theory suggesting that back in the mid to late 1990s, the current eternal president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, seriously harbored ambitions of becoming the president of Russia. Stanislav Shushkevich, the first post-Soviet head of Belarus, recalled that during this period Lukashenko seemed to visit Russian regions almost more often than Belarusian ones. Against the backdrop of an alien and weakening Boris Yeltsin, the younger, more robust Lukashenko looked quite appealing. His populist rhetoric resonated with the residents of the Russian provinces and parts of the military, many of whom still held nostalgic views of the Soviet Union. For example, oligarch Boris Berezovsky recalled that the Belarusian leader was genuinely considered within some Kremlin circles as a possible successor to Yeltsin, potentially as a head of a new union state of Russia and Belarus. Moreover, in 1997, Belarus sent Russia a draft treaty proposing a union that could have made Lukashenko its head. But forced political integration did not happen. Minsk refused federation, Moscow refused unification, and Lukashenko never became president of the United Russia. Vaygach Island. Vaygach is a virtually uninhabited island on the border of the Barents and Kara Seas in the Arctic Ocean. The island is known as a place where in the 1930s hundreds of Gulag prisoners were sent. It was planned to mine gold and other minerals. Members of the expedition studied the local soil and sent samples of local ore to Moscow. The analysis showed that there were deposits of gold, silver and platinum on the island. However, in practice they were not found. Instead, lead zinc ores and hundreds of ancient Nenets idols were discovered. The Nenets called this island a land of idols, and the modern name is based on the Nenets name Vaygach, which translates as Island of Terrible Demise. It was on Vaygach that the Nenets conducted sacrifices and mysterious rites. In the island sanctuaries, hundreds of wooden idols were a place for contact with the world of the dead. However, there is an opinion that some of the idols on the island are much older than the Nenets themselves, and we don't know who they belong to and what they mean. Today, Vaygach holds a kind of a cult status among seekers of the mythical Hyperborea. They sometimes view it as a uniquely sacred place, an island historically uninhabited, yet serving as a major sanctuary complex for the peoples of the north, possibly preserving echoes of a far older civilization. Thanks for watching, and that is all for our level 5. Once again guys, I'm asking you to leave a like and comment. It is extremely important for YouTube algorithm, and for me too. And as always, a huge shout out to my biggest supporters: Елизавета Zakharova, Kirill Klimuk, Zeman Berzer, Jimmy Elbin, Petr Ilich, Marina Holiday, and to other members who wish to remain anonymous. See you guys next time.